Support for this podcast comes from the patrons at patreon.com/FMLFPL. Okay, welcome to another Fireside Chat. This is Alon. Today we're joined by a recurring character on the pod, backed by popular demand, Michael Caley of the Double Pivot podcast. How's it going?
Going all right. Thanks for having me back. I cannot believe we're about to have another season.
It's too soon.
Only just ended, I swear to God.
I know. Everyone who's asked me is like, oh, are you so psyched FPL's back? I'm like, I could do another month, to be honest. But,
seriously.
So before we dive into some players, where can people follow you on social media, read your work, listen to your pods and all that stuff?
Yeah, so I am the co-host of the Double Pivot podcast with Mike Goodman of CBS Sports. We've been doing that for a while. We've got a Premier League preview coming up. We spend a lot of time with transfers. This season has been weird. We think the transfers will happen, so eventually but we do a lot of transfer analysis over the offseason when it happens on a regular schedule. I've also got the Expecting Goals newsletter that has been dormant for several months. Some of that was the election season. Some of that was my life. Some of that is this stuff is just hard. And I'm really excited to be able to actually, on this podcast, talk about a few things that I am working on that are, I think, fantasy relevant. So I'll be able to talk about that, and that's at expectinggoals.com. So, patreon.com/doublepivot, expectinggoals.com. Gotta say the links, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'll put them all in the show notes and stuff. So let's jump in. We're just gonna go through some guys that I think me and also other people in FPL are thinking about and talking about. And an interesting place to start is Rodrigo Muniz of Fulham. Mm-hmm. I'm a Patreon subscriber to the Double Pivot, and I think a while ago during the season, I kind of floated Muniz in the mailbag of the Double Pivot Discord, and you were like, just too few minutes, he's getting a lot of shots, but there's not that much to say. But now, as we're like sort of projecting into a new season, I find him really difficult to project because, again, so few minutes, and then like historically so few minutes also. But when he starts, he really gets a lot of shots and pretty good ones. So what do you do with someone like him?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we did end up talking about Fulham a bit and how they had improved down the stretch. Exactly as you're saying, this is a guy who ended up getting 9 goals in about 1890s. Exactly what you want to see. From goals about equals XG. And he did it by getting tons of shots. Not super high quality shots, but tons and tons of shots. Loves to get headers, shots in the box all over the place, shots from reasonably close distance. And that's the kind of profile that you really like to see. And then, as you're saying, he also, the season before that, played at Middlesbrough in the Championship and was not particularly impressive and didn't play that much.
Yeah.
And now, it is worth noting the season before that, he had some very big numbers purely as a sub, but getting like 5 shots per 90 as a sub. And even if you take a pretty big chunk of that off for there's a sub adjustment I worked out. Even if you take a fairly big chunk of that off, his Fulham numbers in 21-22 were quite good. And it's a small sample. The other thing that I've been working on the Expecting Goals newsletter, this is stuff I'm sort of in progress, is sort of taking steps toward what does a projection system look like, and what do you do with past stats, and how do you project future stats with past stats. And what I've found is that while there isn't while there's a lot of randomness, while there's a lot of variation, adding in large regression to the mean factors, even regression to the mean factors that are based on positional averages, which certainly work better than those based not on positional averages, you don't want to add too much regression to the mean. What I found is something like 590s is what you add to a couple of seasons.
Got it.
And so when you've got a guy with 1890s, and it depends on the statistic, obviously. We'll be talking about some guys later where if you're interested in assists, you got a different kind of problem. But
Okay.
shots, shots tend to be pretty sticky. So if you've got a guy getting 4 shots per 90 and you've got 1890s of it, I really start to believe. I'd want to see him play. You'd want to be able to add in as much information as you can. But when you've got a guy getting, XG per shot has a lot more randomness in it than, it's an interesting sort of statistical thing to try to piece together, because XG per shot has a ton of randomness in it year to year.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that shots predict XG better than XG does itself, or certainly that they predict goals better than XG does.
Okay.
And so, it's not that you can take another step back. You're getting a lot of signal in XG that you're not getting in shots, while at the same time, you want to have a little bit more, you want to regress it a little bit more when you're depending more on XG per shot. So, Muniz's profile, while, getting 4 shots per 90 doesn't suddenly suggest he's going to start getting 0.8 XG per 90, start getting really high XG per shot.
Yeah.
It is a safer profile than one that's 2.5 shots and high XG per shot. So all of the pieces I really do like here with Muniz.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be part of my follow-up question is how many more good performances with good stats do you need to sort of think okay, this is repeatable and this is just who this guy is? How far into, say, he has 3 good games is just wow, we need to adjust everything. This guy's just great.
Right. Because the thing with Muniz is it's not talking about a guy suddenly having a breakout season. It's not because then the issue is it's not the regression to the mean factor. When you have a breakout season, the regression to the mean factor is the past performance. And I think last season we ended up on the double pivot getting a little bit out of our skis on Matthias Sule, who had put up I think 12, 15 very good 90s at that point. And the second half of his season was just much worse. As you have to look back at what he'd done in the past and how good was it. With Muniz, I think the more interesting question with Muniz, it's less if he's getting a goal per night, a goal every 2 games, 4 games, 2 goals, say he scored 3 goals and everyone's really happy or whatever. Say they put him on penalties, who knows? And that's not really new. I think in some ways the question with Muniz is more, what do you do if he's only got 6 shots the first 4 games? Yeah,
right. Then it's where do you adjust to? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that having those 590s of average play, for a striker, something in the range of 2 shots per 90, adding that in gets you still into the high 3s. It's still pretty good. Gets you into the 0.4s for XG rather than the 0.5s for XG. All of that is still quite good. It's just if you just take it as it is, you could start projecting elite numbers and you wouldn't want to do that. But I think the question with him really is how much do you regress it and how much a slow 5 games affects your analysis.
Right. I also wonder, maybe, this will be me be in your article, so we don't need to go too deep in, but I also just wonder always with managers, it's is Marco Silva just getting Mitrovic production out of Muniz and this is the shape of production that a striker in a Marco Silva team, produces? Or, is he finding players that fit this specific mold of production? Because when you look at sort of Mitrovic's last Fulham season and Muniz, there's a lot of similarities in just quantity of shots, quality of shots, XG, all of this kind of stuff.
It's an interesting question. He also got much worse production from Raul Jimenez.
Yeah.
In the same period of time. So I do think that the thing about Muniz, and this is, not exactly fantasy specific, but that is reasonably different from both Mitrovic and Jimenez, is that Mitrovic was a hold-up striker. He didn't touch the ball a ton, but he received long passes and he received progressive passes.
Yeah,
through by the aerial route, not not running the channels, but through the aerial route, he got a fair number of touches. And Jimenez much more is a running the channels kind of striker. Muniz just gets way fewer touches.
Yeah.
Muniz just doesn't touch the ball outside the penalty area.
He shows up in the box. Yeah.
He just gets in the box and gets shots. And it is a profile the way this matters for fantasy is very second order.
Yeah.
In order for this guy to be good, he's got to be getting those shots. He does nothing else.
Right.
And I think it suggests that Silva is finding other ways around this team to get the stuff to get Muniz, rather than, the amount of build-up production that you would get from Mitrovic as a hold-up guy, and the somewhat lesser but real amount of build-up production you'd get from Jimenez running the channels. You're not getting that from Muniz.
Right.
You're just getting the shots.
Just the shots. Interesting. And then, maybe we'll just jump to another Fulham player here, because maybe one of the ways that Marco Silva envisions moving the ball up the pitch is Emil Smith Rowe. I saw the transfer fee and I was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, he's played 500 minutes in the last 2 years or something like that. Curious about like the sub effects on his numbers, because so many of his goals and good underlying numbers came in a sub appearance, but also what is like the upside? I do really believe there is like if he stays fit and he can do this, then like maybe this is a really good signing, even though I think the odds of that are small.
Yeah. I mean, Emil Smith Rowe was, very much the like prototypical guy is having a breakout season. Fans are super excited. Stat nerds are like, hey, pump the brakes. This is mostly finishing air.
Yeah.
He, when he came up for Arsenal in that 21-22 season, the season they finished fifth. It was the first like really good season under Arteta.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the best stuff they got came as he sort of moved out of those positions, not into he was getting less than 2 shots per 90. And the big thing was that he wasn't really producing that much as a creator. He was played in that 10 role a fair amount, but it's not even remotely comparable to what they got out of Odegaard in that role. Emil Smith Rowe averaged less than a pass into the penalty area per 90. He was averaging he's assisting 1.5 shots per 90, and again, there's a huge amount of air in assists. But he didn't have those either. There just wasn't that much there. He was a 10 who was a little bit in that kind of false 10 range, where you are in the 10 space, you are touching the ball a fair amount, but the whole point of you is getting shots, and he's not getting that many. I don't know. He was 20 and 21 at the time. And there was certainly a reasonable case that Emil Smith Rowe would, having gotten a bunch of minutes at this age and being a reasonable Premier League squad player 2021, that's good.
Yeah.
Then, over the next couple of seasons, would that guy maybe improve? Would some skills pick up? Maybe he starts to get more shots. Maybe he does get more involved in creation. All those sorts of things are possible, but then he didn't. He was injured. And so is it possible that development has just sort of happened behind the scenes in training or something, or the skills are just going to suddenly pop when he shows up at training. Like maybe, but I'm just very, very skeptical that there wasn't that much there when he was 20 and 21, and then he missed 2 seasons, and it's just hard to expect that much. The one thing you could say for Fulham is that they didn't really get that much out of that role anyway.
Yeah.
They got very little out of Andreas Pereira in that role. They got relatively little out of Alex Iwobi when he played that role. So I don't think it's going to make Fulham that much worse, but it feels like a missed opportunity for them. And I for a fantasy player, it's just a punt on maybe something happened the last 2 years we don't know about, and that's why Fulham spent this money. Like, that's the level of logic I think you've got to be working on to see something positive out of this early.
Even the minutes he did play for Arsenal, I mean, in those very few minutes, you could see like per 90s that look really appealing, right? Like the passes in the penalty area like skyrocketed. He got way more shots and stuff, but it's so few minutes that it's just kind of hard to build the case. But then, I mean, maybe you don't know, but what happens in fantasy is like the transfer happens. He plays his first preseason game. He combines with Anthony Robinson, immediately scores a goal, and everyone's like, oh my God, the vision, like it's happening. The Smith Rowe thing is all happening. So, I guess building a dream on that is kind of what we do as FPL players.
Yeah.
Let's jump to a couple Brighton guys. We can start with Nkuba Minte. I'm going to stick with. He just looks incredible. I mean, he's kind of the type of guy that like you see Twitter clips and YouTube highlights and you're like, oh my God. And then you pull up his FBref page and it's all 99th percentile for everything that matters, and 10 goals in the 1690s, and he's 19, and Brighton are so good at scouting talent, but there's not anything else. I don't know anything else about him. Like, is this legit star potential? Like, why weren't other teams, fighting for this player?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think that Minta has just turned 21, and he is a super high usage wing, which is a profile I think a lot of teams have been trying to get. A guy who he's going to touch the ball quite a bit. And when he touches the ball, he's going to try to do something with the ball. That means he's going to lose the ball a lot.
Mm-hmm.
His pass completion, all the green bars on FBref, but not the pass completion.
No.
And he's going to try to beat his man all the time, which means he's also going to lose the ball a lot when he does that. He also takes a lot of shots. He ends a lot of attacks when he takes shots. And I think that a lot of people sort of coming from basketball, where immediately those are the red flags. The high usage players in basketball are the sorts of players that like have ceilings. Maybe they're a floor raiser, but they're not a ceiling raiser. And I think that's just not how soccer works. A possession is just not that valuable.
Right.
And doing more risky things, guys who are able to do those more risky things have become more and more valuable at the top end. I think that there is my theory is that there's like a knock-on effect where if you've got a guy who can create something without you moving your rest defense around in possession, you're getting something much more valuable. It's actually helping your defense to do that.
Yeah.
And the issue with Minta, obviously, is that he was playing in the Eredivisie.
Yep.
And we have seen just massive, massive variance over the years in how well Eredivisie statistics translate. It's not just like it's an easy league. There are things that players do sometimes in the Eredivisie that like work there and don't work somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so is he one of those guys to some degree or another? It is very hard to say. I think that, Brighton have made moves like this with a plan to rotate guys in and out and see what they can do and get minutes. Like, it's very much the sort of thing where I would have a tendency, maybe not super statistically correct, but because the possible variance on his quality is so high, because, there are players where their Eredivisie stats translate reasonably well league to league. And if he's one of them, he's 20 and he's ready to be a star.
Yeah.
And so if you get a few 90s where he does look like he's ready to be a star, where the shots are coming, all of that stuff is translating, it would be the sort of thing where I would start to believe relatively quickly. I mean, I've watched YouTubes. He clearly does really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't have any, deep confidence in my own scouting, and nor has my own scouting been particularly extensive. So it's an error bars thing.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, he's obviously cheap in FPL because, again, he's 20, he's unproven, like all these things. But then, even if you just compared him to like Antony, who I think is probably the most famous recent Eredivisie winger. I mean, he basically doubled Antony's XG at his last season at Ajax, and he's younger, and it's just like, what?
Right. Antony is a case of Eredivisie statistics translating reasonably well.
Yeah, because he just wasn't that good, and he still isn't, right?
Yeah, Antony scored 9 goals in the Eredivisie. It was a completely insane transfer, and then coming over to the Premier League and being in the 0.3, 0.4 XG per 90 range and some shots. That's about, I think, what a 1-to-1 kind of just take X percentage off the top would look like for Antony. If you, exactly as you're saying, if you do that to Minta, you're looking at one of the better wingers in the league.
Right. So that's where the dream begins there. But I did want to also just go back. I mean, you said that a lot of possessions end with him shooting, and I was kind of looking to see maybe he takes a lot of bad shots, and that would be a red flag. But his XG per shot is 0.17. It seems like way above average. So at least he's taking good shots, right? And they're in the box.
Yeah, it doesn't seem it's not a profile where you just are going to expect those shots to go away. I agree. I think that one thing you can look at is a guy whose average shot distance is 20 yards. Then you're talking about shots that in a better system probably just go away. Right. And that doesn't seem to be the case. It may be that they are shots that you wouldn't get against non-Eredivisie defenders, but that's a different question.
Different question. Yeah. Okay. And let's jump to João Pedro. I think he, again, just really, I mean, you're seeing a theme with all the guys I'm bringing up. They're all cheap in FPL and hard to project. I mean, so João Pedro, 22 90s last season for Brighton. He obviously has played in the Premier League before this, so maybe there's more to build on there. He scored 4 pens, so there's a lot of air in the goals. But also, he played 4 different positions, I think. I think he played both wings. He played some striker. He played some 10. He also missed time with injury. But his numbers are just good, anyway, right? He's getting shots. He's getting XG. Ferguson's still injured. Pedro might also have a knock or something too. But I think people in FPL are kind of thinking he might just be the striker coming into the season. What are you seeing with João Pedro?
Yeah. So last season, when they picked him up, his Watford profile was pretty straightforward. He was a high usage wing type. And so my thinking from that was that, Brighton have picked this guy up because they know that they're probably going to lose Mitoma at some point, and they want another player of that ilk who is going to be able to take on a man. The big thing that pops in his Watford numbers in the Championship is massive. numbers of take-ons attempted. He receives a lot of progressive passes. And the shots were like, okay, he got like 2 shots per 90, a little more than that. That's solid. You can work with that. He scored 10 non-penalty goals in 30 90s. That's good for a 20-year-old in the championship playing wing. But it's hard to see it as something that goes in the Premier League. And then Brighton pick him up, and Brighton just start playing him through the middle.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of this is that they, I think that they were counting a fair amount on Evan Ferguson as a striker. And then he, really struggled and got hurt and just wasn't available. But even before that, João Pedro was playing quite a bit of striker.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not that sold on him as a striker. I mean, there's 4 penalties in here. There's, and what is interesting is that as a striker, and I think my guess is that this is the reason that it works, is that he's able to get quite a few touches compared to the average striker. And so, he is still doing a lot of running the channels. He is still doing some take-ons. His take-on success rate went down quite a bit. Again, statistically, this is something that you do not want to put too much on. Take-on success rate is just wildly variable. Variable. And so, I think that, I want to sort of play around with like expected take-on success rate based on location of the pitch. And
that I was going to ask, because he's in the middle, maybe, it's just more guys, harder to take on. Yeah.
Exactly. Which, I mean, would suggest probably that what'll happen is he'll do it less.
Right.
But, he seems to me like a guy where his value to Brighton is that he can give you he can be a kind of wingery striker, or he can be a winger. And that is a valuable thing. But for like fantasy, I think you're really betting on the penalties adding into a merely okay level of striker production. He's like, he had like 3 shots per 90 and not super high XG per shot last season. That's just, I don't know.
Penalties are good though. Penalties are free goals in fantasy. So that's why, I just want to clarify, what exactly do you mean by when you say high usage winger?
Yeah. So again, a high usage winger I think of as someone who ends a lot of possessions.
Oh, okay.
That a possession ends with them, and that can be shots and that can be goals.
Right.
But also like it's a guy who is doing a lot of high risk things, take-ons, aggressive passing. Again, a lot of those will lead to turnovers. A lot of those will lead to someone else getting a shot and ending a possession quickly. All of those sorts of things. It's not quite as perfect as like high usage in the NBA, which just means taking lots of shots. But it's a similar kind of idea. More someone where when you get them the ball, there's a fairly good chance that's where the possession's going to end.
Got it. So would that be? I have 2 more weirdo wingers on here, and Brennan Johnson and Anthony Gordon, and it seems like a lot of possessions probably end with these guys too. Brennan Johnson.
That's a really good point. Because the other thing is they've got to touch the ball. Like you cannot be high usage if you don't touch the ball.
So what's it called when you end a lot of possessions but you don't touch the ball? Or sorry, you end the small amount of possessions where you touch the ball. Whatever that's called. I don't know what that's called.
Right. Like I mean like the if you don't do either of those, you just suck.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I would say that among like good players, among players that do have a fair amount of actual production, around wingers who like, we would talk about it on an FPL podcast because they're going to be getting some goals and assists.
Yeah.
Like that would make Johnson and Gordon low usage.
Right.
That they're just going to have fewer touches in the middle third. They're going to have fewer touches in the final third. They're not going to lose the ball all that much because they're not going to touch the ball that much. And what you're going to get out of them is how many times are they going to put the ball in the back of the net? How many times are they going to play a cutback across the face of goal for their striker to finish? Right. And that's their whole game.
And so if you sort the entire Premier League last season by non-penalty XG plus XA per 90, in order, it goes De Bruyne, Salah, Haaland, Darwin, and then Brennan Johnson, baby. So he's obviously one of the best attackers in the league, right?
Clearly. And I do think that that this is something that applies to him as well as to Gordon, is that when you are looking at XAG, you gotta be taking a lot of the air out of it. The sort of I've got I do a sort of a Bayesian correlation, so it's not just a straight correlation. It's a way of accounting for the likelihood of randomness in the numbers to begin with. And so it'll tend to be a higher correlation, which I think is correct. Like, the actual correlation of all of these skills is higher than the raw numbers would suggest, because there's obviously randomness in the sampling. And that's sort of what I've been using for these studies that are coming out. And, for expected assists, you've got something like 40. They explain about 60% of the variance, as they say, the correlation squared is about 60%. So there's 40% of the variance, 40% of whatever is causing expected assists comes from something outside of expected assists.
Okay, and I was about to ask for the layman explanation, but you just did it. Yeah.
so the number is only giving you maybe 40% of the information that you need.
I see.
But numbers only giving you about 60% of the information that you need.
Yeah.
And for assists, it's even lower. It's something like 35% or something like that. And so, with Brennan Johnson, he's both him and Gordon, not quite half, but close to half of the XG XA combination comes from the expected goals assisted. And, Brennan Johnson only averaged about 2 shot assists per 90. And then, the XA, the number on this is an Opta number based on modeling, like the pass is completed. Where is the pass completed from? And mostly just where is the pass received? And based on the completed passes where they're received, how many assists is a player going to get? And Brennan Johnson's expected assists are a little over half of his expected goals assisted.
Yeah, I just want to, for people listening at home on FBref, that's the XAG is expected goals assisted. That means the pass before the shot. And then XA is what you're talking about. I think a lot of people don't know that distinction.
The modeled expected assist based on where the shot is, where the pass is received.
So like Brennan Johnson's 0.19 XA per 90 based on where he receives the pass. And then he's 0.35 expected goals assisted. So almost double. Yep.
And so, because we know that there's a huge amount of variance in expected assists, and then on top of that, the correlation between XA and it's very close. How well expected assists project expected assists is very, very close to how well shot assists project expected assists. Expected assists is a little bit better, but 0.2 correlation. And
wait, sorry, can you say that again? I got confused because I think both are called expected assists.
Yes. So what I'm working with here is not the Opta XA. So let's put that aside when I'm talking about my own data. I don't have a good version of that system. I played around with a few things and hopefully in time, but I don't have an XA. So I don't have a testing on that number that is on the FBref website. It makes sense to me. But I can't speak to I don't know if they've done on their blog any testing. Sometimes they put stuff out and I miss it. But in any case, so talking about expected goals assisted, shot assists are just about as good at projecting expected goals assisted as expected, which is not true of shots and XG. And so again, I'd want to see, if I'm looking for someone who's actually going to have a lot of assists year to year and a lot of expected assists year to year, you really want to see that volume of shots assisted. And so, obviously, I've spent all of this time talking about why I would take a bunch of air out of Brennan Johnson's expected assists numbers. If that was all you did to his numbers, say you go, he's going to get 2 expected assists per 90 at a totally normal 0.1 xg per 90. That's basically his XA. You put that in there, you're still talking about 0.65 xg and XA per 90. You're still talking about
huge chances all the time.
Huge numbers.
Yeah.
Like, the big problem is that, the reason I didn't like the signing for Tottenham last season was that he did nothing like this at Nottingham Forest. He played tons of minutes at Nottingham Forest, and his production was nowhere close to this. And it was in a different role. I think that is important to say. At Nottingham Forest, he basically played striker, and at Tottenham, what he plays is a winger who is a striker. He is that sort of prototypical low usage winger with production. You don't get him the ball. He's going to get to the back post, and he's going to either finish the chance in the back post, or he's just a little bit wide of the back post. He's going to play the cutback. That's the whole game.
Right.
And maybe he's particularly good at that. And I think this is sort of with him and Gordon. It's something I've been wondering about, because this happened 2 guys. I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't like a lot of money, but it's weird it happened twice.
Yeah.
And both of them on much worse teams, playing as wingers who received the ball in the middle third, were terrible. Or Johnson, like, trying to do hold up as a striker and then occasionally get a few shots. Just no good. And they're just not very good at, I joke about this, and it's unfair because they're professional footballers who make a lot of money and last year justly, but they're not good at football. You don't watch them do all the cool stuff. Yankuba Minta's skills and tricks video is 100 times better than anything he would ever do for Gordon or Johnson.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the most football is you can kind of think about the pitch as a funnel where you think about value. Like, everything outside of that semicircle around the goal has so little value. It's got value, obviously. The ball doesn't just move from here to there, don't worry. But you need to do that at volume for it to matter. Over and over and over and over and over again for it to matter. Whereas if you do stuff right around the back post and you do 4 things per game, you can be a good player. And with Johnson, and what strikes me is you just can't have that role on a Nottingham Forest or an Everton.
Right.
There's no guy on that team who can do 4 actions in a game. They've got to be doing a lot more than that. You need to have tilted the field quite a bit to get that value out of them. And so I am if you add in Brennan Johnson's previous season, and the weightings that I've been working with are something like 4-2-1. So you weight the most recent season double the season before which is weighted double the season before that. Again, as with regression to the mean, you really do weight recent stuff and actual production pretty highly in projecting players, I have found. I think just because so much is changing. You and I think this is true of Johnson and true of Gordon. But if you add that in, you take a 2-to-1 average of the XG, there's a gap of 8.18 between Johnson's XG at Forest and his XG at Spurs. And so if you take the middle point 12, that's like 0.38. And if you're getting 0.38 XG and you're getting 0.18 XAG, you're getting real production out of that. And
and these are kind of low end, safe, safe estimates, I feel like, right? Who knows what the upside is? He's still only 22, right? So
right. And both him and Gordon have a lot of upside based on their age. And it's a similar kind of situation. Gordon's production was lower, but Gordon also did it in more minutes. You'd also, the regression factor is going to be a more significant factor in Johnson's numbers than in Gordon's because of the difference in minutes. But I'm halfway a believer in this really odd role for a guy who's just like super, super fast.
Yeah, I was going to mention the speed. That's the one thing that FBref doesn't have, right? Is like, well, how fast does he get from point A to point B? Because that's how they both succeed.
Exactly, because everyone's defending the back post. It's not like no one knows the back post is valuable. Yeah. It's just that they can get there really fast.
They just beat the defender there every time.
Yep. And, if that's what you're doing, and that's so, and like if most people can't do that because they're not fast enough, and you can do it, and you can do it 5 times a game, and you can be in a team that's tilting the pitch enough to make it work, like, I buy it. Yeah. I'm taking big chunks off of their numbers based on their past performance, based on regressing their expected assists. You can do something similar with Gordon's expected assists as you can with Johnson's. But even so, all of those things, you take all of that out, you still end up with some like real production.
And also, I mean, just Brennan Johnson specifically is 5.3 under his XG last season. And like, there's been no previous sign of him being like the worst finisher in the world. So even just that, if he just gets back to a normal level, like you could just see an increase of goals, even if the XG goes down, right? So
exactly. The thing about Johnson having 5 and 10 is that you want to take a ton of air out of the 10, but there's also like, a ton of good chances missed.
Yeah,
in the 5s. Like you could just kind of flip him around and you've got an okay picture of what he did last season.
Very interesting. Okay, yeah. I'm looking that way. Very different position and player. Someone else I want to talk about is Ian Maatsen. I mean, Villa seem to be one of the only teams making transfers. He looks really exciting. I mean, based on what we saw last year with like Konsa's emergence at right back, I think the left back should just like live in the final third the entire game. But there's also not that many key passes, not that many successful crosses, not that much shot creation in general. Like, is he more of just like a facilitator and progressor and possession guy? Or is there like an upside to him, you think, that you'd be like, he could just rack up assists just by like, being so far forward?
Yeah, we will see. What I have been impressed with in Ian Maatsen's game more than anything else is him as a possession fullback. That he's very, very good at showing for the ball, helping progress the ball up the pitch. When I look at this Aston Villa side and the way that it has been put together, what they cut Douglas Luiz out of the center of it. Mm-hmm. They cut their guy who's really, really good at receiving a pass and making the next pass in midfield while doing enough defending that you don't need to cover for him with somebody who's just their legs. And it looks like next season they're going to be depending on Ross Barkley to do quite a bit of that. Kamara is a similar-ish player to Douglas Luiz as well. He'll be receiving the ball a fair amount in the middle. But, I look at that balance and I'm like, yeah, a possession fullback who stays back a bit probably makes more sense than, a bombing on crossing guy. When exactly as you're saying, it's not something he's done a ton of. Yeah. So my guess would be that the way that this will work for Villa is that Maatsen will allow them to be more aggressive in midfield, rather than that Maatsen himself is going to be a major contributor with crosses and assists.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was gathering from the numbers, but that does make sense with the change in like their possession structure, maybe. And then, like, I guess just piggybacking off of that, I mean, Morgan Rogers is a really popular FPL pick right now because he's so cheap and he kind of just came out of nowhere and looked really good and does a lot of cool stuff. And I think Leon Bailey similarly just sort of had like an incredible season. And now that Diaby's gone, everyone, including myself, is just expecting he's going to get all the minutes and get a lot of goals and assists.
Yeah. And I mean, the way that Emery's system works, you get a striker and you get a second forward and then you get a fake forward.
What does that mean?
You get a guy who really who's nominally in the forward line, but not, actually getting into the penalty area.
Yeah.
John McGinn did that. I think you can imagine Amadou Onana doing that kind of stuff. And, just like a really, really big John McGinn. And just stretch like his neck out into a whole person.
Exactly.
But so what that means is that last season, Bailey and Diaby split time.
Yeah.
Because you don't actually have a third forward role in Emery's system. And this season with the Champions League, even more so. I think those guys are going to rotate. It's also it's a tough role to play because you do have quite a bit of defensive responsibility. You're not just freed from your defensive responsibility. You've got to get back a lot. And then you've got to be the guy who's there with Watkins to get the chances when they're in transition. And so I would tend to I think it makes sense to look at Morgan Rogers and think, well, they're betting on this guy.
Yeah.
The production last season was not super high, but they're really, really betting on this guy. And Leon Bailey had a breakout season, a career season playing in this role. Maybe you get more out of that. But I think the worry, thinking in purely FPL terms, is I think you're going to get them rotated the same way they did here. These guys both put up huge per 90 minutes, but fewer than 25 90s each.
Right. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Just a couple others. I mean, I don't know. This might just be a rumor, might be nothing, but Solanke to Spurs is kind of just won't leave Twitter. And also that means probably Richarlison being sold. There's a 3-tier striker question here. I think Richarlison's numbers are just way better than Solanke's, but he can't stay fit. I'm curious what you think of Dom to Spurs. Does a player on a worse team's numbers necessarily increase when they go to, a more attacking, better team? And then lastly is just Unal. If this actually happens, I assume that's why Bournemouth made Enes Unal permanent. And I'm just curious what you think of him maybe just out of nowhere becoming a starting striker for a pretty good Bournemouth team.
Yeah. So it's a whole lot of pieces.
Sorry.
And I think that the biggest thing is that Tottenham have a very difficult offseason to figure out because they've got a lot of players who haven't been playing a ton of minutes.
Yeah.
And then some of the guys who have been playing a ton of minutes, like Son Heung-min, you have to be projecting them to, you're going to start limiting their usage so you can keep getting production out of him, hopefully for a couple more years. The way you do that is by having other people play more minutes. And Richarlison, ever since he had that season where he just played football all year and never got a break, has been getting injured a ton. He, as you're saying, he got a ton of shots for Tottenham. And, Tottenham get a huge number of touches in the penalty area, which seem to translate into shots. And I think that one thing I'm working on, I don't have something to preview for you as I do with some of the other stuff, is exactly what it means to move from a worse team to a better team is because obviously, guys on better teams get more goals. That just obviously happens. But exactly what it means to be on a better team is a difficult objective question. How do you describe it? Do I have to pull down wage bills?
Right.
Is there some tendency if a team has a certain number of touches in the penalty area, is that just going to lead organically to shots, and those are going to have to be distributed among the players who are in the penalty area? Exactly how does that work? And I think it's a question that I doubt has a simple one-to-one answer.
Yeah, that
you
seems
can think about
so
players.
complicated.
One of the ways you can think about players who get moved to striker, and Dries Mertens goes from being like a solid winger to like one of the best strikers in Italy for 5 years.
Yeah.
And Lucas Moura gets moved to striker and just like looks like Lucas Moura, but he's in the center. And like there's different skills that are involved, and exactly how they translate is a really complicated question. With Richarlison, it's just all injuries.
Yeah.
It's just all.
If he stays fit, he's going to be great.
If he stays fit, he's going to get the shots are going to be there. The goals are going to be there. The goals were there last season, and whereas Solanke is, he's just been a good striker.
I was going to say he's kind of the opposite, because he's definitely going to get the starts because he plays 3,000 to 4,000 minutes every year. But it's like, is he going to be good? Is the other question.
Yep. And, he had the kind of season for Bournemouth in the Championship in 21-22 that is like, that's what it looks like when a guy is a good Premier League striker playing a full level down. You go from like 0.6 XG per 90, and then he wasn't as good his first season in the Premier League, and he was much better last season. It's like 0.4, 0.45, and that like is about where I would have expected him to fall. He's a high XG per shot guy. He doesn't get a lot of shots from distance. He doesn't get a ton of shots. Like he turns his touches in the penalty area into shots pretty efficiently. And I can see the case that a guy with those sorts of skills is someone that would translate to a better team. I'm just making that up. I don't really know.
Yeah.
And, I think that if Spurs are going for him, the story this morning is that Richarlison really doesn't want to go to Saudi Arabia. And, they've got a deal with Saudi Arabia, but isn't there someone you forgot to ask? And so, and that would, I don't see Solanke coming into Tottenham at these prices as like a rotation forward.
No.
Doesn't really make sense. But the reason you're getting Solanke, exactly as you're saying, is that Solanke plays minutes.
Yeah.
And you get that, and you're happy. He's not been a great finisher his whole career. That was obviously the story at Liverpool. We'd put up those XG numbers in very, very limited minutes. And so I think you want to be very, very careful about saying who's a good or a bad striker. But lots of strikers, you're saying, well, I at least give him 10% above XG because they're finishing well, and he doesn't have that. You got to be putting him at XG, and that's another knock against him. So,
but if he gets the Brennan Johnson bump, the Ange Brennan Johnson bump, then who knows what's possible.
Right, exactly. If he can go from under 3 shots per 90 to 4 shots per 90, as say Richarlison did, you can start to get a lot of production out of that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then any thoughts on Unal? I mean, we have a lot of top level minutes. He played all the minutes for Getafe, but they're weird. And I feel like, almost all of his minutes last season were just like last minute sub to try and get a goal. So like basically throw that all out the window, probably, right?
Yeah, you add it into the average, and it's 3.5 90s in the 2 previous seasons. He played 33 and 31. So it's just going to get swamped. He's I haven't watched that much Getafe, and obviously I to all of your listeners, don't do it. Don't do it. Love yourself. It's some of the work. Like La Liga has become the place with the worst football in Europe over the last 4 or 5 seasons. It's just some true football terrorism.
Yeah.
And so it makes it a little bit difficult to know what to do with a guy who was playing in such a system. But at the same time, like striker is one of the more like translatable roles. The guy in Getafe's system at the top is supposed to occasionally receive an out ball, occasionally run with it, and, be on the end of chances when they very occasionally break or on set pieces. And he was okay at that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Bournemouth have smart recruitment people. They maybe there are things that they are seeing, but it's hard to take a lot out of Unal's numbers in La Liga. And if they're going to bet on it, then that's great. But there's not a lot there.
Cool. I think that's about it. I was gonna also, if we have time, I guess throw Nkunku in there. I think we actually talked about Nkunku in our preseason last season, because I was like, is this guy the best player in the world? Like, his numbers are out of control. And now, he missed basically the entire season with injury. He's fit now. He's playing every preseason minute, and he's really cheap in FPL. And so I think a lot of people are just like, well, he's underpriced because he's still great, even though we kind of like don't know what Chelsea are and don't really know where he's going to play. Anything to add on Nkunku?
Yeah, I mean, he was. He's been he was a rotation player, played a fair number of minutes for Leipzig for years, and had like the one really bad injury for the most part for Chelsea.
Yeah.
And, I think that, projecting injury in soccer is one of those things that obviously incredibly valuable, because if you get 590s out of a guy, you got nothing.
Yeah.
And, and a guy, if you can really believe that Dominic Solanke is going to give you 30 90s, and most players are probably going to give you 15 to 20, that's massively valuable. Yeah. But at the same time, I think we tend to overstate how open to statistical analysis that is. There's not a great correlation between, minutes missed in one season and minutes missed in the next season.
Yeah.
And, what's wrong on an underlying level is something in their body, which either is something that will, and different problems in your body have more and less long-term effects. And so that's just something that you cannot know. But Nkunku did, he wasn't that great for Chelsea in those limited minutes, but there was nothing in those limited minutes that would suggest there was something really wrong with his game. And
he got shots, he got goals.
Yep.
Yeah.
He played. He got shots, and he has an incredible level of production in the Bundesliga. To my eye, he just kind of looked like Nkunku, the guy I'd seen in the Bundesliga.
Yeah.
And so, you're risking it all on both the minutes being there and, this massively overfull Chelsea squad making sense. But yeah, I like the guy last season. I like him this season.
Yeah, fair enough. That's what I figured. I think that's it. I mean, I selfishly want to ask about some like Zubamendi rumors and stuff like that, but I'll just wait for the double pivot episodes to come out whenever that transfer gets done.
Sounds good. Yeah, that guy's not doing shit in fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. Never a pick in fantasy, so I'll save it for that. Cool, man. Well, yeah, thanks again. Thanks as always. And, everyone should check out the double pivot. I've been a Patreon subscriber for however long you guys have had a Patreon. A big fan. So, yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, and thank you for your help with the audio editing. If there has been improvements in the audio editing over the years that I've been doing, thank Alon.
All right, cheers, man.
Cheers.